Commander Vexistar of the Hegemony's Third Fleet had witnessed terror across 17 star systems. He had seen the acidic death screams of the Melkari dissolving their own carapaces in desperation. He had watched proud Zentorian warriors soil themselves before the bioweapons of the Scourge. Fear, he believed, was a universal constant, a predictable response that could be catalogued, measured, and exploited. That was before he met Lieutenant Sarah Chen. The human stood barely 5.5 feet tall, her dark hair pulled back in the regulation style of the Terran Defense Corps. By galactic standards, she was laughably fragile. No natural armor plating like the Kithra, no venomous sacs like the Visek, no psychic abilities like his own hegemony forces. Just soft skin, brittle bones, and organs that could be punctured by a sharp stick. Yet as the combined fleet prepared for what military analysts called a certain massacre against the Void Reapers, something in the human's demeanor made Vextar's dorsal plates itch with unease. Your species' inclusion in this operation remains questionable, Vextar said, his 4 eyes studying tactical displays that showed the approaching enemy fleet. 12,000 ships strong, each one a kilometer of twisted metal and dark energy cannons. The Void Reapers had consumed 18 civilizations in the past cycle alone. Perhaps your vessels should remain in the rear guard. Lieutenant Chen looked up from her own console, and that's when Vextar saw it, a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth. Humans called it a smile, he knew from the cultural briefings. But this wasn't the diplomatic pleasantry he'd witnessed in negotiations. This was something else entirely. "Oh, Commander," she said, her voice carrying an odd note of anticipation. "We wouldn't miss this for anything." The words themselves were innocuous. The tone was almost eager. Vexitar's secondary brain, the one evolution had gifted his species for detecting predators, began screaming warnings. Across the bridge, other members of the coalition force shifted uncomfortably. Captain Threndal of the Aquarian Collective unconsciously moved away from the human tactical officer. Even the usually unflappable Kithera engineers seemed to find urgent business elsewhere whenever the humans spoke about the coming battle. It wasn't just Lieutenant Chen. As the final preparations commenced, Vextar noticed the same expression spreading across human faces throughout the fleet. They spoke quietly among themselves, sharing what appeared to be jokes. Several were actually humming, as they loaded ammunition and ran final diagnostics on weapon systems. The Void Reapers emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metallic locusts, their ships scarred with the atmospheric burns of a dozen dead worlds. Their communication was the same as always: surrender or be consumed. No negotiation, no mercy, just the cold promise of extinction. The coalition fleet formed up according to plan. Heavy cruisers from the Hegemony in the center, the nimble fighters of the Zentorians on the flanks, support vessels trailing behind, and there, scattered throughout the formation like small wolves among sheep, were the human ships. "All vessels prepare for engagement," Vextar commanded. His voice carried across the quantum communication network to nearly 6,000 allied ships. "Remember, our objective is to delay them long enough for the evacuation of Kepler 442b. We are not expected to—" "Contact," Lieutenant Chen interrupted, her sensors detecting the first wave of Void Reaper attack drones. "Estimated time to weapons range, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. And then she smiled again. This time, Vextar saw other humans on the bridge mirror the expression. It was spreading like a contagion of anticipation. One of the human engineers actually chuckled while priming the main guns. Another was tapping his fingers against his console in what Vextar recognized as a rhythmic pattern. Music, perhaps, though what kind of music one hummed before dying was beyond his comprehension. "Lieutenant," Vextar said carefully, "are your people well?" Sarah Chen turned to face him fully, and for the first time he saw what lay behind that smile. It wasn't madness as he had begun to suspect. It wasn't even bravery in any sense that he understood. It was something far more unsettling. It was joy. "Commander," she said, "do you know what humans call a fight where we're outnumbered 2-1 against an enemy that's never been defeated?" Vextar's translator worked frantically with the human idiom. "No." Her smile widened. "Good odds." The first exchange of fire lit up the void between the fleets. Plasma bolts and antimatter torpedoes crossed the darkness, turning the space between stars into a galaxy of brief, violent suns. Ships on both sides began to die, their hulls splitting open like overripe fruit. But something was wrong with the Void Reapers. Their formation, Usually a perfectly coordinated swarm of destruction began to show gaps. Ships that should have pressed their attack started to hesitate. Some even began to fall back. "Commander," his sensor operator called out, "the Reapers are retreating?" It was impossible. The Void Reapers had never retreated. Not once in their documented history. They consumed or they were destroyed. There was no middle ground. "Show me tactical overlay of human ship positions," Vextar ordered. The display updated, and suddenly everything became terrifyingly clear. While the rest of the coalition force had engaged according to standard fleet doctrine, the humans had done something unprecedented. They had abandoned all defensive formations and were pushing directly into the heart of the enemy fleet. Not cautiously, not with measured tactical advance, but with the aggressive enthusiasm of predators who had found prey. Lieutenant Chen was coordinating what appeared to be a dozen separate boarding actions simultaneously. Human Marines were cutting through Reaper hull plating and fighting in the corridors of ships that were supposed to be impregnable. Others were ramming their fighters directly into enemy engines, ejecting at the last second only to magnetize to nearby ships and continue the assault on foot. And through it all, they were still smiling. The retreat turned into a rout. For the first time in galactic history, the Void Reapers, a species that had never known fear, fled before an enemy. They scattered into hyperspace, abandoning their formation, their objective, and their reputation. In the aftermath, as rescue teams searched the wreckage and medics tended to the wounded, Vextar found himself staring at the humans with new understanding. They hadn't won because they were stronger or better armed. They had won because when faced with certain death, their response wasn't fear or resignation. It was enthusiasm. Later, in his official report, Vextar would struggle to explain what he had witnessed. How could he describe to the Hegemony Council that humans didn't just fight? They celebrated conflict. That they smiled before battle not in spite of the danger, but because of it? The galaxy had always known fear as the currency of conquest. Terror was a tool, a weapon to be wielded against the weak-willed and unprepared. But humans, Vextar realized, were the first species he'd encountered who had weaponized something far more dangerous than fear. They had weaponized joy.